Joanne Hanna is going to speak next. She's a longtime colleague of mine and a great colleague to have, working for formerly CAW, now UNIFOR, on pensions and benefits. She's actually the director of the unit of pension and benefits in that union.
So I'm very pleased to be here today, and I want to thank Kevin for organizing these sessions, because I'm speaking to you as a pension practitioner who's involved in the negotiations, and some of the issues that Kevin referred to, I mean, we really do feel this attack on our pensions, and so, you know, the fight back and being involved in that. But having this session set up on pension fund investment and the readings gave me an opportunity to reflect, and I feel like I don't get enough time to do that, so this was really good. I would like to do a little bit of a follow-up to Kevin's history of the United States moving towards to more employer-based pensions and healthcare, because it reminded me of a very interesting story in Canada, where we got the CPP and Medicare in 1965, 1966, and that was supposed to take care of people. And then in 1980, about 79 or 80, the Women in Poverty report came out. And it was devastating. It showed that something like 84% of single elderly women were living in poverty. And you know, shame on all of us. So that led to a major movement with the churches, social activist groups, trade unions about addressing this issue of poverty in retirement. And one of the proposals that was gaining a lot of momentum was to expand the Canada Pension Plan and the old age security. The employers fought tooth and nail against this, because at that time they had surpluses in their pension funds and it looked good on their books, and so they wanted to keep these private pension plans. And so there was a meeting in Ottawa, and Monique Bégin, the employers all said, we'll do better. We'll do better in providing pension plans in the workplace. Really, really, we will. So Monique, the story goes, Monique Bégin looked at them, and she was the Minister of Health at the time, Liberals. She looked at them and she said, okay, we're going to make modest improvements in CPP and old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, but you better do what you say you're going to do. Well, of course they failed miserably, but that's the past now, and we're back again saying we need to expand the Canada Pension Plan. I also have the dubious honor that when I was a graduate student at UBC and I was presenting a paper on a panel, and who comes into the room but Monique Bégin? And I'm thinking, wow, that's Monique Bégin, wow. So she comes in and she sits at the back of the room, and I get up and I present my paper, and she had her head against the back of the wall and she promptly fell asleep.
Oh
dear. So what I'd like to talk about today on the on unions being active in the investment of pension funds is I'd like to look at three questions to frame my talk. So first question is, do we think that it will make a difference in corporate practices? My second question, is it a tool for membership, mobilization, and education? And my third question is, do we want to avoid embarrassing situations and the contradictions where we see our funds invested in things that are not good with our principles? And I think the John Calvert paper, where he talks about union funds, pension funds, to build a highway in the Maritimes where the community is protesting this road, and then it's like, oh, CUPE's building that road, we don't like CUPE, you know. So those kinds of situations which are very public and very difficult. And also, Kevin, I picked up on the Simon Archer article, the note that the Teachers' Pension Fund has a policy not to invest in companies with DB plans. I mean, for a teacher, that's kind of like a poke in the eye, isn't it? So those kinds of embarrassing contradictions. So let me look first, do we think that by monitoring the investment of pension funds, we are going to make a difference in corporate practices. And Simon Archer has talked about the size of the funds and how those investments are happening in the economy. And Jim Stanford has also had a look at this, and Jim Stanford has come out and said he doesn't think that in the scheme of things, this is where we should be putting our efforts, that it's probably not going to make a huge difference. I'm going to leave those folks to discuss that issue. That's not my realm of expertise. I think it's an interesting debate, an important debate, but I'm going to leave it to others. But I think for public sector workers, this issue of P3s, where you see your funds actually being invested into schools or hospitals where the services are being privatized and the jobs become non-union, that's a significant issue because you see specifically exactly what's happening with those funds. Moving to the next issue that I think is important, is it a tool for membership education and activism on corporate practices? So one of the things that SHARE recommends is that we do the proxy SHARE votes. That is the most mind-numbing process in my mind of activism. In the States, the UAW that oversees this retiree health care fund, which through the Detroit 3, the companies offloaded all of their retirement obligations onto this fund, and the UAW oversees it. It is the largest health care plan in the United States today. It's phenomenal. So all of those investments, they have one person who works full-time to vote all of the proxy ballots. And, so she goes through there. Do we agree with corporate or executive compensation increases? No, we don't. But so maybe there's some impact there, but I just find that a hard thing to get excited about. But I do want to talk about another issue that I thought was really interesting. And it was, I think, 10 or 15 years ago, the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund had investments. It's kind of like the Port-Air issue. The Ontario Teachers Pension Fund had investments in Maple Leaf Foods. And Maple Leaf Foods went on strike. And this is when the teachers were starting to get interested in becoming activists in the labor movement. Like they started to say, we're not seeing ourselves as professionals so much. We see ourselves as working class, and we want to be involved in having a say over our working conditions and class size. And the way we're going to do that is through more activist measures. So when the union approached the teachers about the strike at Maple Leaf Foods, the teachers responded, and they went to their annual general meeting and they made a proposal that they divest the funds in Maple Leaf Foods as a signal to the corporation, to Maple Leaf Foods, that the strike was not acceptable. Well, the board refused, citing their fiduciary responsibility that they couldn't just willy-nilly take money out. I would say the board was probably right in that decision. And if you think about it, it was a socially responsible investment for the Teachers Fund. It was a Canadian corporation, was a unionized corporation, and I think at that time they had a defined benefit pension plan as well. So it was a good investment, and there is something to say about just pulling the funds out over a job action. But here's the discussion that I had with Sam Gindin, and I don't know if Sam even remembers it, but it really stayed with me. Where was the true political mobilization on that issue at the grassroots level? Not about the board moving money around, but really where the membership mobilization happens around the Maple Leaf Foods strike. And what we talked about was why didn't the union, and I think it was the UFCW that had the Maple Leaf Food Workers, why didn't they talk to the unionized workers who were delivering Maple Leaf foods on their trucks into the stores? Why didn't they talk to them about saying, I'm not delivering these products. I'll take everything else out of the truck, but not the Maple Leaf foods. And what about the cashiers, another union? Why didn't they say, we're not going to check out Maple Leaf foods? Like, wouldn't that have been a really significant action where people really became educated on the issues of that strike at Maple Leaf Foods? So I think the point that I'm making here is that I worry that this notion of how we invest these funds, it happens at a very technical, financial expert level, as opposed to what we really need to be doing as a union is mobilizing our members on the issues that are so important around working and pensions and job conditions. And I'll make one other point about the political mobilization. The John Calvert article gives some very good information about P3s. And when I read this article, I started to think, gee, P3s are really not good investments. They're financially, they're expensive, they're risky, and they erode public services, which workers depend on. So isn't this a public policy issue? And shouldn't we all be lobbying our governments to spend our tax dollars wisely and to maintain good public services? Isn't that really the issue here that's important? And I'm also very proud that our previous president, Ken Luenza, took a really strong position on public services and that we should be paying our taxes to have good public services. So instead of this being an issue for the investment of pension funds, I think it's a broader issue that we all need to be politically involved in. My third question in the investment, monitoring the investment of pension funds, is do we want to avoid shameful situations? And I think that we do. I think that's a really important issue. And I think about the clothing workers in Bangladesh who were killed when the building collapsed. And so in our union, we had a minute of silence for those workers. And I would look around the room and I would think, you know, I wonder how many of us have got our pension funds invested in some kind of scuzzy clothing manufacturing operation. And limiting our investments so we don't invest in those kinds of operations is probably not going to do a lot for the textile workers of Southern Asia. But it's going to avoid those moments, those really high-profile events that happen where we experience a lot of shame about those investments. I'm going to end reminding people of the Canada Pension Plan with its $200 billion invested all over the world. And this is an issue that the public sector workers and the private sector workers are very much on board to expand the Canada Pension Plan. It's a very important way of dealing with the attack on our pensions by having all workers get a decent pension from the Canada Pension Plan and in Quebec, the Quebec Pension Plan. But I want to talk about the investment of the CPP funds. And it was a number of years back, I think it might have been in 2005, where the CPP Investment Board did their presentation of their triennial report on the funding of the CPP. And they went across the country making this presentation. It was public. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful because there were these young people who were protesting the investment in a Canadian mining company that was over in Miramar and engaged in all kinds of really horrible practices. So they were at the microphones saying, you know, you must get out of that mining company in Miramar. But the real lobby movement was among the teachers and the medical practitioners and professionals. because they had identified the investments in tobacco industry as a real problem. And they got up to the microphones over and over and over. So the board was, they had to address it because it kept coming up in the meeting. So the board would say things like, well, we just followed the direction of Parliament. Parliament sets the policy on how we're going to invest the funds, and you need to talk to your Minister of Parliament. Go talk to your minister. Over and over. And so it actually got to the point where the board was saying, well, we don't smoke. None of us smoke, which was great. It was really good. And the next year, there's still problems with how the CPP is invested. There's still problems. But the point is they are accountable to the Canadian public. And the next year, they did come up with a socially responsible investment strategy that does not include tobacco in their investments. So I'm going to end on that, and thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have.